When you are new in town, new to a town, you really don't want to embarrass yourself, you know. The last thing you want to do is to do something or to say something that will get this response. You're not from around here, are you? So far, I think I've avoided any major foul-ups. I was a little shaky when we went to Lizard's Thicket and had to place our order. But we played it cool. And we've played it cool for the last few weeks and haven't been accused of not being from around here yet. But we've all been in that situation, right? Have you ever been accused of not being from around somewhere? In a new or unfamiliar place, we get to be full of questions, full of complaints, full of confusion, but we're so eager not to do something foolish and be asked, where are you from? Well, I mention that because today, this gospel story from John is some verses about questions and confusion and people who don't quite understand, don't quite believe where Jesus is from. This morning, we heard the next part of John chapter 6. It's part of this serious discussion between Jesus and the crowds who are following him about bread and the bread of life and who Jesus really is. All this is important stuff because what Jesus says and does in this story, in these verses, speaks not just to the crowds who he was with that day, but certainly speaks to us and to our time. So each week, we've been noticing the way that Jesus addresses a real-world problem. We've talked about hunger and the fear of not having enough. We've talked about belief and disbelief and wanting to believe in something. And so in today's reading, we have a new problem. And here's the problem Jesus addresses. It's the need to question things. The need to complain about what might be true. And that need, that questioning in this story sounds like this. How can he say, I have come down from heaven? How can he say, I have come down from heaven? Say that with me. How can he say that I have come down from heaven? Those are the words of the crowds again, who want to know, how can it be? How can these things that Jesus is claiming about himself be true? He is the bread from heaven who gives life to the world. He is the one to believe in. He is the one who gives eternal life. About all these things, the crowd says, we've got questions. And one of the questions they ask is, isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph? We know this guy. We know who he is, and we know where he is from. He is from around here. And we know him enough to know he isn't something special. Well, that's what the crowds thought they knew about Jesus. Turns out they don't really know him as well as they thought. But it makes sense, doesn't it? That the crowd would have so many questions. What Jesus is claiming about himself, the faith that he is inviting them into, well, it doesn't align. It does not compute with their understanding of things. So they have some questions and some complaints about it all. Some things never change. Questions and complaints about this faith of ours and if it makes sense, well, those are a part of our experience too, aren't they? Ever had a conversation with someone who's not a person of faith, but who has lots of questions about it and lots of complaints about why it doesn't make any sense to them? Those are challenging conversations, sometimes fun conversations too. But you see, the crowds were in that same state of mind when they asked, "How can he say, 'I have come down from heaven'?" They are a bit cynical, full of doubts and questions, and Jesus knows it. So Jesus says to them, "Do not complain. Just understand this. No one can come to me unless drawn by my Father. No one can come to me unless drawn by my Father." And those words of Jesus are really important for at least two reasons. First, it's Jesus' way of saying you can't figure all this out on your own. Coming to believe in Jesus is not an act of mental power or determination of the will. Martin Luther's Small Catechism said it this way, explaining the Creed. You ever hear these words? "I believe that I cannot, by my own understanding or strength, come to Jesus my Lord or believe in him. No, God is in the midst of this process. No one can come unless drawn by the Father." Which means those who come because the Father is at work in them. Which brings us to the second thing about those words of Jesus. When Jesus says, "No one can come to me unless drawn by my Father," it's also Jesus' way of proclaiming that God is indeed drawing people in. I don't think it's meant to be an exclusive sounding thing. No one can come. The emphasis, it seems to me, is on the good news that God the Father desires to draw people to him. Desires it so much that he has sent Jesus to do just this. Here's the thing about the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, Jesus does lots of things, says lots of things, but there is really one thing that Jesus wants people to understand and to believe. And that's this: that Jesus has come from God the Father. Where is Jesus from? Jesus has come from God the Father. That's what he wants people to know, what he wants them to understand. There's details and implications and so much more, but the crux is Jesus has come from God the Father. Or maybe another way to look at it is this. I heard the New Testament scholar N.T. Wright give this little illustration in a video. You can watch it too if you go to YouTube and search for N.T. Wright. What is the gospel? If you're into that sort of thing. But the illustration was this. N.T. Wright says he was talking to a friend who said, "Here is this wonderful house that is the Christian faith. But what's the front door? Where do people come and go?" And Dr. Wright says the answer is, it is Jesus himself. Jesus himself. You see, God has opened the door to questions, to doubts, and to faith in Jesus. God chose not to rule from afar, to hide away from the questions of the world, but instead sent Jesus to hear the questions, to accept them, to shed light on them. The nugget of good news that shines even through these kind of preachy words of Jesus today is that God draws us in through Jesus, opens the door in Jesus. God brings the very door of heaven into our midst through Jesus. And in doing so, God has decided to be from around here, to be around us, to be with us. Questions and complaints, well, they will still abound, our own and others we know. And our response as people of faith to those with questions, to those who ask, how can this be? Is simply this: to listen and to show them Jesus.